Hello, everybody. This is Patty, and I decided to come on today without a scarf. And I get some flack from that sometimes because people expect you to look a certain way or do a certain thing. And that's part of me having it all put together is when I have my scarf on. But I want to go back to a time when I did not have it all together because some people need to know that the polished presenter that I sometimes might appear to be is not the whole story about me. And there was a time in my life where so many things were happening that I was just putting out fires. I was trying to work full time, raise my children, um, get along with my family members and husband, and just everything seemed to be going wrong all the time. In fact, I was at the hospital so often that this person stopped me in the hall and they said, can you help me with something? And started asking me questions about where to go and what to do. And I said, I don't work here. Well, I just saw you here the other day. I said, I know, that was another family member. I'm here today because of my husband. And I had to convince this person that I was not an employee, I was just a visitor. Um, so that should tell you something then. They saw me there a lot. So one of those visits, well, it happened a couple of times, but in 1996, I got a phone call in December that my husband was about to be admitted to the hospital to have a catheterization, and I should come there. Now, he worked at a hospital, so I was like, really? Are they mistaken? And I went, and sure enough, he was having some kind of heart problem. They did the procedure and they didn't find anything. And so they sent him home. And he would go off and on for a few years and things would happen and some doctor give him a different medicine. Nobody could figure out what was wrong. And one day he called me and he said, I'm in the emergency room and I think I have a migraine. Okay. He'd had migraines before, so I went there expecting to go to a dark room and see him quietly with an IV. When I arrived, all the lights were on. They had three monitors monitoring his heart rate, which is jumping all around, and the paddles were sitting on his chest. And they turned the monitors so he couldn't see them. And I said, what is wrong with you? And he said, something's happened to my heart. And if they can't get it regulated with some medicine, they're going to take me upstairs and jump start it. They're going to stop his heart and start it again. Um, and I said, well, that's certainly not a migraine. Well, after a lot of tests and going through lots of procedures, and I mean, where they stick a light down inside this end and that end, and just anything you could think of, he got every test in the book. The doctor came to us and said that he had a hole in his heart. And I said, is he leaking? What do you mean a hole in his heart? Where's the blood going? Um, And what it was is sometimes children are born with this congenital problem where there's a hole inside and they have to have a procedure to close it. If it doesn't shrink on its own, the valve gets stuck open. And my husband was about 50 years old. He shouldn't have lived that age with that problem. He was referred to a cardiac heart surgeon and put through just every test I can imagine. And they decided they could do a special procedure instead of open heart surgery and try to fix this problem by going up through one of his arteries. And he did get it fixed, but when we go to that doctor, the only doctor that could help him was a pediatric heart surgeon. So there'd be all these children and my 50-year-old husband. It's a miracle that he lived, and he's now 75. And last year he had the first really bad health scare since that time, and he had a bad bout with diabetes. Um, and he's much better now, but it's amazing, what happens and what we don't expect that can just wreck our lives, our daily situation. And at the time that he was sick, my parents were elderly, my children were having problems, and it was just like one thing after the other. And then some incidents occurred, and I couldn't cope anymore. One of my girlfriends um, one of my daughter's friends died in a car accident, and it was just like more than we could take as a family. Now, well-meaning Christians will sometimes say, God won't put any more on you than you can take. Somebody said that to my dear aunt one time, right after her husband died and she had a car accident. She said, well, I wish you didn't have such a high opinion of me. And I thought, what a great answer. Because the fact is, God will give you the way of escape for temptation. So they're misquoting what God says in His Word if they're using that as their example. But when it comes to having more on you than you can take, that happens sometimes. Some people are broken. Some people never recover. And I got post-traumatic stress disorder from that and the trauma of all the other things that were happening at that time. And there were a couple of people said, are you sure you had that? Well, I didn't diagnose myself. I went to a medical profession when I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I was losing my short-term memory. I worked in a law office, so that wasn't cool. And I would be weepy all the time, and I'm talking for months, not just a few weeks. And I confided in a friend one day, I was reading all these self-help books and nothing was helping. My friend said, well, maybe you've got depression. So I went online and I took this test for depression where you have multiple choice questions because I really wasn't ready to go to a shrink or anybody yet. And after I took the test and printed it off, the answer said, seek professional help immediately. That's pretty bad. Um, so I took my test and I called a friend who was a professional counselor, and he was also a minister, and he knew all of our circumstances. So I didn't have to explain everything to him again. And I handed him my test. And he asked me all the questions again. And he gave me a better grade. And, and I was crying, of course. I cried at the least little thing, but then I started to smile in the middle of my tears. And I was a little bit encouraged, but I wasn't better. He just cheered me up for a few minutes. But he also said I needed to go to the doctor because he thought I had PTSD. And I went and I wrote down everything that was going on to my doctor. And he was our family doctor, so he knew a lot of our circumstances. And I ended up going on medication. And I'm glad I did. It was very humbling, and I didn't have to stay on it the rest of my life. But when I started taking that medicine, they said it can take a couple of weeks for it to work. I felt better immediately. Maybe it was psychological, but I knew the medicine was doing something because I had lost my ability to cope with stress, and I was getting that back. When stressful situations came, I wasn't quite the basket case I had been. And so there was light at the end of the tunnel finally, and there was a solution to this problem because my problem was is some people have PTSD. They have like a video playing in their head. And that was my problem. I couldn't stop thinking or seeing or hearing conversations. I couldn't get over anything anymore. And the next thing that happened would just add to it. So I needed that medical help and professional help. And I also needed something else, some spiritual help. And I went to a lady on a retreat and I told her a secret problem that I had. And the secret was that I was terrified and I felt guilty that I was terrified. Christians are supposed to be people of faith. We're not supposed to be people of fear. And every part of me was afraid of losing my husband, afraid of losing my children, afraid of everything. And I was so nutty afraid that if my family member goes somewhere, I would have them come home in 30 minutes just to make sure they were okay. And then one of them moved 3 hours away. And wow, that was difficult. So I confessed this fear to my friend, and she said that that's your mother's heart. What you're feeling is normal. Well, the fear didn't go away right away, but the guilt did. I stopped feeling guilty that I was afraid and I thought I wasn't being a good Christian because I was terrified. And eventually, I stopped having that cycle of feelings and I started getting healthier and getting more normal again. Now, all the problems didn't go away. There are still problems, but I learned to cope again. And I stopped crying about every little thing. And my health improved. I wasn't sick like people getting a cold or a virus, but I was spiritually, emotionally a basket case. I think in a earlier society, they might have said I was having a nervous breakdown, but whatever it was, the pain eased. And I'm so glad it did. So I just want to tell you, if you are going through things that are overwhelming, get the help you need. Don't be too proud to tell someone you trust that you are struggling. And if the first person you talk to doesn't help you, go to another one. Find a counselor, a wise counselor who can pray for you, who can encourage you, who can stand with you when maybe nobody else wants to. And when I say that, we even went through a crime situation, and a lot of people turned away from us, didn't know how to handle it, so they wouldn't visit with us or speak to us. And it's very lonely when you're dealing with something like that. So don't be isolated. Get into the family of God where you can get the help you need. And I want you to know you're not alone. Thanks. Bye for now.